The research ship Meridian drifted silently above the green and blue planet known as Kepler 442b. Dr. Lisa Martinez pressed her face against the viewing window and watched the swirling clouds below. After 6 months of travel through space, they had finally reached their destination. This would be humanity's first meeting with an intelligent alien species, and Lisa could feel her heart beating faster with excitement and fear. "Are you ready for this, Doc?" Captain Steve Morrison asked, as he walked up behind her. His voice was calm, but Lisa could hear the tension underneath. Everyone on the ship felt it. Today would change everything for humanity. Lisa turned away from the window and picked up her datapad. "As ready as anyone can be for something like this," she said. "The scans show their cities are massive. These aren't primitive beings we're dealing with." The alien species they were about to meet called themselves the Vorthic. From what humanity had learned through long-distance communications, they were the dominant life form on this planet. The Vorthic had built a civilization that spanned their entire world. They had technology, art, and culture. They also had something else that made the human diplomatic team nervous. They were predators. Big ones. Ambassador John Fletcher joined them at the window. He was an older man with gray hair and tired eyes, but he had handled difficult negotiations on Earth for over 20 years. If anyone could manage this first contact, it was him. "The shuttle is ready," Fletcher announced. "We'll be taking a small team down to the surface. Lisa, I need you there to observe their behavior. Steve, you'll handle security with 2 of your people. The rest of the diplomatic team will stay here until we know it's safe." Lisa nodded and gathered her equipment. She had studied every piece of information they had about the Vorthic, but she knew that nothing could really prepare her for meeting them face to face. The descriptions from their long-distance communications painted a picture of beings that were both intelligent and terrifying. The Vorthic stood nearly 3 meters tall and weighed as much as a small car. They had thick fur that ranged from golden brown to deep black. Their arms were long and powerful, ending in hands that had retractable claws sharp enough to cut through steel. Their faces were a mix of features that reminded humans of both tigers and bears, with large fangs and eyes that could see in almost complete darkness. But what made them truly dangerous was their intelligence. The Vorthic had evolved from pack hunters, and they still maintained their hunting instincts even after building their advanced civilization. They worked together with a coordination that impressed and worried the human observers. The shuttle ride down to the planet's surface took 20 minutes. Lisa spent the time reviewing her notes and trying to calm her nerves. Through the small window, she could see the Vorthic city growing larger below them. The buildings were massive structures made of stone and metal, designed to accommodate beings much larger than humans. They landed on a platform at the edge of the city. As soon as the shuttle doors opened, Lisa caught her first smell of the alien world. The air was thick with scents she didn't recognize, but underneath it all was something that made her skin crawl. It was the smell of predators. Even though the Vorthic were civilized, their scent still carried the memory of the hunt. The Vorthic delegation was waiting for them. Lisa counted 6 of the massive aliens standing in a semicircle around the landing platform. At their center stood the largest one she had ever seen, even bigger than the descriptions had suggested. This had to be Groffel, their pack leader and the one who had been chosen to speak for their species. Fletcher stepped forward first, followed by Lisa and Captain Morrison. The 2 security officers stayed near the shuttle, their hands close to their weapons, but not touching them. Everyone had agreed that showing fear or aggression would be the worst possible start to these negotiations. "I am Ambassador John Fletcher, representing humanity," Fletcher said, his voice carrying clearly in the alien air. "We come in peace, seeking friendship between our peoples." Groffel tilted his massive head and studied the humans. When he spoke, his voice was deep and rough, like gravel falling down a mountain. The translation device at his throat turned his words into English. "I am Grathal, first hunter of the Vorthic," he replied. "We welcome the humans to our world." But something strange happened next. Instead of continuing with the formal greetings they had planned, Grathal began to move closer to the humans. The other Vorthic followed him, forming a loose circle around the human delegation. Lisa felt her breath catch in her throat as the massive predators began to circle them. This wasn't part of the planned first contact protocol. She could see Captain Morrison tense up, ready to signal his security team if needed, but the Vorthic weren't showing aggression. Instead, they seemed to be studying the humans with an intensity that was both fascinating and unsettling. Grathal approached Fletcher directly, lowering his great head until his eyes were level with the ambassador's face. Lisa watched in amazement as the alien predator stared directly into Fletcher's eyes. She had studied animal behavior on Earth, and she knew that direct eye contact between predators was usually a challenge, a threat. But this was different. Grathal wasn't challenging Fletcher. He was looking at him with what could only be described as recognition. The massive alien's nostrils flared as he breathed in Fletcher's scent. His eyes, which were the size of dinner plates and colored a deep amber, never left the human's face. Fletcher, to his credit, held perfectly still and maintained eye contact with the predator. After what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds, Grathal did something that shocked everyone present. He slowly lowered his head in what was unmistakably a bow. Not a deep bow of submission, but the slight nod of acknowledgement that one equal gives to another. The other Vorthic followed their leader's example, each approaching a different human and performing the same intense stare before offering the same respectful nod. Lisa found herself face to face with a female Vorthic whose fur was marked with silver streaks. The alien's eyes were different from Grathal's, more green than amber, but they held the same strange recognition. As Lisa looked into those enormous eyes, she felt something that made no sense. It was as if the alien was seeing something in her that even Lisa herself didn't know was there. Vorthic finally stepped back. Grathal spoke again. "You have the eyes," he said simply, as if that explained everything. Fletcher, who had handled diplomatic surprises for decades, managed to keep his voice steady. "The eyes?" he asked. "The eyes of the hunt," Grathal replied. "The eyes that see beyond the moment. The eyes that remember the deep paths." Lisa felt a chill run down her spine. The Vorthic's words made no sense, but they were said with a certainty that suggested deep meaning. The formal negotiations continued after that, but the strange beginning had set a tone that none of the humans had expected. The Vorthic treated them not as strangers or even as new allies, but as if they were meeting old friends after a long separation. Throughout the day, Lisa noticed that the Vorthic kept looking at the humans in that same intense way, not with the curiosity they might show toward any new species, but with a recognition that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than conscious thought. As the shuttle carried them back to the meridian that evening, Lisa stared out at the alien city below and tried to make sense of what she had witnessed. She had documented every interaction, recorded every conversation, but she knew that the real mystery wasn't in what the Vorthic had said. It was in how they had looked at the humans, as if they were seeing something that connected across the vast distances of space and time, something that made apex predators from another world recognize humans as their own kind. 6 months had passed since the first contact with the Vorthic, and Dr. Lisa Martinez still could not get their strange behavior out of her mind. She had written dozens of reports about their meeting, but every time she tried to explain what had happened, her words felt empty. How could she describe the way those massive predators had looked at the humans with something that felt like memory? Now she stood on the bridge of the exploration ship Horizon, watching another alien world grow larger through the viewing screen. This planet was called Titan's Edge, and it was nothing like the green forests of the Vorthic homeworld. Below them stretched endless deserts of red sand, broken only by massive rock formations that rose like ancient towers toward the sky. The beings they were about to meet were called the Zephrians. From the information humanity had gathered, they were as different from the Vorthic as two species could be. Where the Vorthic were massive and powerful, the Zephrians were long and graceful. Where the Vorthic hunted in packs, the Zephrians were solitary ambush predators who could wait motionless for days before striking. Captain Steve Morrison, who had been promoted after the successful Vorthic mission, checked his equipment one final time. "Are you ready for round 2, Doc?" he asked Lisa. Lisa nodded, though she felt even more nervous than she had before meeting the Vorthic. The success of that first contact had put enormous pressure on this second mission. Everyone back on Earth was watching to see if humanity could build relationships with multiple alien species. "Remember," Ambassador John Fletcher said as he joined them, "the Zephrians are completely different from the Vorthic. They don't hunt in groups, and they value patience above all else. We need to move slowly and show respect for their way of thinking." The shuttle ride down to the planet's surface was bumpy due to the constant windstorms that swept across the chrome desert. Through the small windows, Lisa could see the Zephrian city rising from the sand like a mirage. The buildings were tall and thin, designed to catch the wind and channel it through cooling systems that made life possible in the harsh desert heat. They landed on a platform carved from solid rock. As soon as the shuttle doors opened, Lisa felt the dry heat hit her like a physical blow. The air was so hot and dry that it seemed to pull moisture from her lungs with every breath. The Zephrian delegation was waiting for them, but at first Lisa thought the platform was empty. Then she saw movement in the shadows cast by the tall rock walls. The aliens emerged slowly, their movements so smooth and controlled that they seemed to flow like water. Lisa had seen pictures of the Zephrians, but meeting them in person was completely different. They were roughly the same height as humans, but their bodies were long and serpentine, covered in scales that shifted color to match their surroundings. They had 4 arms, each ending in hands with long, delicate fingers that could move with incredible precision. Their heads were elongated, with large eyes that could move independently of each other, and their mouths contained rows of needle-sharp teeth designed for delivering venom. At the center of the group stood the largest Zephrian, her scales a deep blue-green that reminded Lisa of ocean water. This was Cythera, the empress of the Zephrian people. She moved with the fluid grace of a dancer, but Lisa could see the deadly precision in every gesture. Fletcher stepped forward and began the formal greeting they had prepared. "I am Ambassador John Fletcher, representing humanity. We come seeking friendship and understanding between our peoples." Cythera tilted her head, studying the humans with eyes that seemed to take in every detail. When she spoke, her voice was soft and melodic, but there was something underneath it that reminded Lisa of the sound a snake makes when it is preparing to strike. "I am Cythera, Empress of the Zephrian realm," she replied through her translation device. "We have heard of the humans from our allies, the Vorthic. They spoke of you with great interest. But then, just as had happened with the Vorthic, something unexpected occurred." Cythera began to move closer to the humans, her large eyes fixed on their faces with an intensity that made Lisa's skin crawl. The Empress approached Captain Morrison first, moving with the patient stalking motion of a predator who had all the time in the world. She circled him slowly, her eyes never leaving his face, studying him from every angle. Morrison, who had experienced this with the Vorthic, held perfectly still and allowed the alien to examine him. But Lisa could see the tension in his shoulders. The way his hand wanted to move toward his weapon but didn't dare. When Cythera finally stopped in front of Morrison, she did the same thing Grothel had done. She stared directly into his eyes with an intensity that seemed to go beyond simple curiosity. Her own eyes, which were large and golden with vertical pupils, locked onto his and held them. Lisa watched in fascination as the same strange recognition she had seen with the Vorthic played out again. The alien Empress tilted her head, studying Morrison's eyes, as if she was reading something written there in a language only she could understand. After a long moment, Cythera stepped back and made a gesture that Lisa recognized as a sign of respect among the Zephrian people. She placed all four of her hands together and bowed her head slightly. "You have the gaze," she said simply. Fletcher, who had been prepared for this possibility after Lisa's reports from the Vorthic encounter, asked, "What gaze do you mean?" Cythera's eyes moved to Fletcher, then to Lisa, then back to Morrison. "The gaze of the eternal hunt," she said. "The eyes that have seen the long pursuit. The eyes that remember the first teachings." Lisa felt the same chill she had experienced on the Vorthic homeworld. Different words, but the same impossible recognition. The same sense that these alien predators were seeing something in human eyes that the humans themselves didn't understand. The formal negotiations proceeded smoothly after that. The Zephrians were interested in trade agreements and cultural exchange. They were particularly fascinated by human art and music, which they said reminded them of old songs from the deep memory. But throughout the day, Lisa noticed the same behavior she had documented with the Vorthic. The Zephrians kept looking at the humans with that strange intensity. Not with the cautious curiosity they might show toward any new species, but with a recognition that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than conscious thought. During the evening meal, which was held in a beautiful chamber carved from red stone, Cythera made a comment that sent Lisa's mind racing. The Empress was discussing human history, which the Zephrians had learned about through their contact with the Vorthic. "Your species is young," Cythera said, "but your eyes are old. Very old. They carry the weight of hunts that stretch across the star paths." Ambassador Fletcher leaned forward with interest. "What do you mean by that, Your Majesty?" Cythera was quiet for a long moment, her golden eyes studying each human face in turn. "There are stories," she said finally. "Old stories that our elders tell. Stories of the first hunters who came from the sky paths long ago. They taught the people of many worlds how to hunt with wisdom instead of only instinct, how to track prey across great distances, how to wait for the perfect moment to strike." Lisa felt her heart begin to beat faster. "What happened to these first hunters?" "The stories say they went away," Cythera replied. "They traveled to the far edges of the star paths and were not seen again. But they left behind a gift in the eyes of those they had taught, the ability to recognize the true hunters when they returned." Fletcher and Morrison exchanged glances. Lisa could see that they were thinking the same thing she was. The Vorthic had spoken of the eyes of the hunt and the deep paths. Now the Zephrians were talking about first hunters and sky paths. Two completely different species, from worlds hundreds of light years apart, both speaking of ancient memories that connected them to humans. That night, as the shuttle carried them back to the horizon, Lisa stared out at the desert planet below and tried to make sense of what she had learned. She pulled out her data pad and began comparing her notes from both encounters. The similarities were impossible to ignore. Both species had reacted to humans with immediate recognition. Both had made cryptic references to ancient times and first hunters. Both had specifically mentioned human eyes as being significant. But most disturbing of all, both species had legends about beings who had come from the stars long ago to teach them about hunting. Beings who had then disappeared, leaving behind only memories and the promise that they would one day return. Lisa looked at her reflection in the shuttle window and studied her own eyes. they looked perfectly normal to her. Brown, slightly tired. From the long day, nothing special about them at all. But somewhere in the back of her mind, a thought was beginning to form. A thought that seemed impossible, but that explained everything she had witnessed. What if the legends were true? What if humans really had been here before, long ago, when these alien civilizations were still young? What if the recognition she saw in the eyes of alien predators wasn't imagination, but memory? And if that was true, then what had happened to make humanity forget their own past? Dr. Lisa Martinez had not slept well in weeks. Every night, she lay awake thinking about the Vorthic and the Zephrians, trying to understand what she had witnessed. The reports she had written filled hundreds of pages, but none of them captured the feeling she got when those alien predators looked into human eyes with such strange recognition. Now she stood on the observation deck of the science vessel Explorer, watching the gas giant Nephthys rotate slowly in the darkness of space. This massive planet was unlike anything humanity had encountered before. It had no solid surface, just layers of thick atmosphere filled with floating islands of rock and metal that drifted through the clouds, like ships on an endless ocean. The beings they were about to meet lived on these floating islands. They were called the Arachnari, and they were perhaps the most unusual apex predators humanity had discovered. They had evolved from creatures that hunted in 3 dimensions, jumping between the floating islands with incredible precision and on speed. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez joined Lisa at the viewing window. Amy was new to the exploration team, having been transferred from the Marines after completing her degree in biology. She was young and eager, but she also had experience with dangerous situations that made her valuable on first contact missions. "I've been reading your reports about the other species," Amy said. "Do you really think there's a connection between them and us?" Lisa sighed and rubbed her tired eyes. "I don't know what to think anymore. 2 completely different species from worlds that are hundreds of light years apart, both reacting to humans in exactly the same way. Both talking about ancient hunters who came from the stars. It should be impossible, but the evidence is right there." Captain Steve Morrison approached them, carrying a cup of coffee that smelled like it had been sitting for hours. "The shuttle is ready," he announced. "Ambassador Fletcher wants to leave in 30 minutes. Lisa nodded and gathered her equipment. She had requested special permission to bring additional recording devices for this mission. If the same pattern repeated with the Arachnari, she wanted to document every detail. The shuttle ride down to Nephthys was unlike anything they had experienced before. Instead of landing on solid ground, they had to navigate through thick clouds and floating debris to reach one of the larger islands. The pilot, a nervous young man named Gary Collins, had to constantly adjust their course to avoid chunks of rock that drifted through the atmosphere. Like slow-moving asteroids through the shuttle windows, Lisa could see the Arachnari city spreading across the surface of the floating island. The buildings were unlike anything human architects had ever imagined. They were built in all directions, with walkways and bridges that connected structures hanging upside down from the bottom of the island to others that rose from the top. It was a city designed for beings who could move in 3 dimensions without thinking about up or down. They landed on a platform that jutted out from the side of the island, suspended over the endless clouds below. As soon as the shuttle doors opened, Lisa felt the strange sensation of being in a place where gravity seemed to work differently. The air was thick and humid, filled with the smell of ozone and something else that reminded her of spider webs. The Arachnari delegation was waiting for them, and Lisa felt her breath catch in her throat when she saw them up close. They were roughly the size of horses, but their bodies were segmented like insects, with 8 long legs that ended in delicate claw-tipped feet. Their heads were almost human-shaped, but larger, with multiple eyes arranged in complex patterns across. Their faces dotted the center of the group stood the largest Arachnari Lisa had ever seen. This was Queen Vexthala, the ruler of the Arachnari nation. Her body was a deep purple color with silver markings that seemed to shift and change as she moved. Her eyes were the most striking feature, dozens of them, ranging in size from tiny dots to large orbs, all focused on the human delegation with an intensity that made Lisa's skin crawl. Ambassador Fletcher stepped forward and began the formal greeting. "I am Ambassador John Fletcher, representing humanity. We come seeking friendship and understanding between our peoples." Queen Vexthala tilted her large head, and all of her eyes seemed to focus on Fletcher at once. When she spoke, her voice had a musical quality that was both beautiful and somehow threatening. "I am Vexthala, Queen of the Arachnari," she replied through her translation device. "We have heard of the humans from our trading partners. They say you are ... interesting." Lisa watched carefully as the Queen began to move closer to the humans. Just like the Vorthic and the Zephrians, the Arachnari showed immediate interest in examining the human delegation up close. But this time, something different happened. As Queen Vexthala approached, Lisa noticed that the aliens' multiple eyes were not all looking at the same thing. Some were focused on the humans' faces, others on their hands, and still others seemed to be studying their posture and the way they moved. When the Queen reached Fletcher, she did something that surprised everyone. Instead of the intense stare that the other species had used, she began to circle him slowly, her 8 legs carrying her in a complex pattern that allowed her to view him from every possible angle. "You move like hunters," Queen Vexthala observed, "but not like the hunters of our world. You move like ... old hunters. Ancient hunters." Lisa felt the familiar chill run down her spine. Here it was again, the same impossible recognition. But then Queen Vexthala approached Lisa directly, and something happened that changed everything. As the Queen's multiple eyes focused on Lisa's face, Lisa found herself looking back into those alien eyes and seeing something that made her gasp. In the complex arrangement of the Arachnari's eyes, Lisa saw something familiar. Not in their appearance, but in the way they moved, the way they tracked movement, the way they seemed to calculate distance and trajectory. It was the same calculating assessment she had seen in the eyes of Earth's own predators, Lieutenant Amy. Rodriguez, who had been standing quietly beside Lisa, suddenly spoke up. "A hunt like the big cats I studied in Africa," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "Not the way they look, but the way they think. The way they watch and wait and plan." Lisa turned to look at Amy with surprise. The young Marine had put into words something that Lisa had been feeling, but couldn't express. "What do you mean?" Lisa asked. Amy stepped closer to Queen Vexthala, showing no fear of the massive alien predator. "I spent 2 years studying lions and leopards before I joined the Marines," she explained. "The way this queen is moving, the way she's studying us, it's exactly like watching a big cat decide whether something is prey, predator, or competition." Queen Vexthala's many eyes suddenly focused entirely on Amy. "You understand the hunt mind," the Queen said with what sounded like approval. "You see beyond the surface to the truth beneath." That night, after the formal negotiations had ended, successfully, Lisa sat in her quarters aboard the Explorer and tried to make sense of what Amy had said. She pulled up files on Earth's predators and began comparing them to the behavior she had observed in the alien species. The more she studied, the more connections she found. The Vorthic's pack-hunting behavior was similar to wolves and lions. The Zephrians' patient ambush tactics were like those of big cats and snakes. The Arachnari's 3-dimensional hunting was like spiders, but also like certain birds of prey. But there was something else, something that made Lisa's heart race with excitement and fear. All of these alien predators, despite being completely different in appearance and evolution, shared certain hunting behaviors that could only be learned, not evolved. They all used persistence hunting, the ability to track prey over long distances and long periods of time. They all showed evidence of strategic thinking that went beyond simple instinct. And they all seemed to have an understanding of group coordination that allowed them to work together in ways that their ancestors could never have done. Lisa sat back in her chair and stared at her computer screen. There was only one species on Earth that hunted the way these aliens hunted. Only one species that used persistence, strategy, and coordination to bring down prey much larger and stronger than themselves. Humans. But that was impossible. Humans had evolved on Earth. They had never left their home planet until just a few decades ago. They couldn't have taught alien species to hunt millions of years before human civilization even existed. Unless Elisa opened a new file and began typing. She wrote about the way alien predators looked at humans with recognition. She wrote about the legends of ancient hunters who came from the stars. She wrote about hunting behaviors that seemed too advanced to have evolved naturally. And, slowly, as she wrote, an impossible idea began to take shape in her mind. An idea that explained everything she had witnessed, but that would change humanity's understanding of their place in the universe forever. What if humans hadn't evolved on Earth? What if Earth was where they had ended up, not where they had started? What if the ancient hunters and the alien legends were myths, but memories of humanity's own forgotten past? Lisa saved her file and leaned back in her chair. Tomorrow, she would have to present her findings to the rest of the team. She would have to explain her theory about humanity's possible origins among the stars. The conference room on the research ship Discovery was filled with tension. Dr. Lisa Martinez stood at the front of the room, looking at the faces of 20 of humanity's top scientists, military leaders, and diplomats. She had requested this meeting 3 weeks ago, after returning from the Arachnari homeworld. Now she had to convince them that everything they believed about human history was wrong. I know this sounds impossible, Lisa began, looking down at her notes, but the evidence is overwhelming. 3 different alien species, from worlds that have never had contact with each other, all showing the same reaction to humans, all referring to ancient legends about hunters who came from the stars. Commander Ben Harper, the leader of the military forces assigned to the exploration missions, leaned forward in his chair. Dr. Martinez, legends and stories aren't scientific evidence. Every species probably has myths about beings from the sky. Lisa nodded. You're right, Commander. That's why I've spent the last 3 weeks analyzing the data we've collected. The hunting behaviors these species display are not random. They're too sophisticated, too coordinated to have evolved naturally. She pressed a button on her tablet, and the room's main screen lit up with images from their encounters. Look at this footage from our meeting with the Vorthic. Watch how they move around us. They're using formation tactics that wouldn't develop in nature. Pack hunters don't naturally learn to leave escape routes for prey while maintaining perfect coordination. The room was quiet as the scientists watched the alien predators move with military precision around the human delegation. Now look at the Zephrians, Lisa continued, switching to new footage. They're ambush predators, but notice how they position themselves. They're not just hiding and waiting. They're calculating angles, distances, and timing in ways that require advanced mathematical understanding. Dr. Robert Chun, a geneticist from Earth, raised his hand. Even if these behaviors were taught rather than evolved, that doesn't prove. Humans were the teachers. You're right, Lisa agreed. That's why I requested the 4th contact mission. I needed more evidence. 2 weeks earlier, Lisa had convinced the Exploration Council to approve an emergency mission to the homeworld of the Krillian Empire. The Krill were known throughout the galaxy as the most ancient of the apex predators. Having built their civilization millions of years before any of the other species, the mission had been different from the others. Instead of meeting on neutral ground, the humans had been invited to the sacred hunting grounds of the Krill, a place where no outsiders had ever been allowed. Commander Harper had led the team, accompanied by Lisa and a small diplomatic group. They had expected to meet creatures similar to the other alien predators they had encountered. What they found was something that changed everything. Lisa switched the screen to show images from the Krill homeworld. The creatures in the pictures looked like massive praying mantises, but they stood as tall as buildings and moved with intelligence that was both ancient and terrifying. "This is Elder Kithron," Lisa said, pointing to the largest of the Krill in the image. "He is over 8,000 years old, according to their records." When Commander Harper looked into his eyes, something unprecedented happened. She played an audio recording of the encounter. The room listened in silence as the alien's voice filled the air, speaking words that made everyone present feel cold. "Hunt Father," the alien voice said in broken but recognizable English. "I remember the long dream, at first teachings ... You have returned." Dr. Chun sat up straight in his chair. "How is that possible?" "We never taught them English." Lisa looked around the room at the shocked faces. "That's not the most incredible part. After Elder Kithran spoke those words, he led us to something that no human has ever seen before." She changed the screen again, showing images of massive stone carvings covered in strange symbols. "These are in the deepest chambers of the Krill Temple complex. They're over 10 million years old, according to the dating analysis we were able to perform." The carvings showed figures that looked unmistakably human, standing alongside creatures that resembled the alien species humanity had encountered. But these humans were different somehow, taller and more graceful, wearing clothing, and carrying tools that looked far more advanced than anything modern humanity had ever created. "The Krill call these the first memories," Lisa continued. "According to Elder Kithron, they are records of the time when the Hunt Fathers lived among their people and taught them the ways of intelligent hunting." Ambassador Fletcher, who had been quiet throughout the presentation, finally spoke. "Dr. Martinez, what exactly are you suggesting?" Lisa took a deep breath. "I'm suggesting that humans are not native to Earth. I believe we are the descendants of an ancient human civilization that spread across the galaxy millions of years ago. This civilization taught the alien species we've encountered how to hunt with intelligence and strategy. Then, for reasons we don't yet understand, they disappeared." The room erupted in voices as everyone tried to speak at once. Lisa waited for the noise to die down before continuing. "There's more," she said. "Elder Kithron gave us access to their genetic archives. Dr. Chun, I've sent you the data for analysis, but the preliminary results are shocking." Dr. Chun looked down at his tablet, scanning the information Lisa had forwarded to him. His face grew pale as he read. "This can't be right," he muttered. "What does it say?" Commander Harper asked. Dr. Chun looked up at the room. "According to this data, every apex predator species we've encountered has genetic markers that shouldn't exist in their natural evolution. Markers that are consistent with genetic manipulation by an advanced civilization." Lisa nodded grimly. "The ancient humans didn't just teach these species to hunt. They actually modified their genetics to make them smarter, faster, more coordinated. They created the perfect predators and then taught them how to use their abilities. But why?" asked Dr. Sarah Williams, a historian who had joined the exploration program. "Why would an advanced human civilization spend time teaching aliens to hunt?" Lisa switched to the final set of images from their meeting with Elder Kithron. These showed carvings that were different from the others, darker and more frightening. They depicted massive shapes moving between the stars, consuming entire worlds. Elder Kithran called these the Void Hunters, Lisa explained. According to the Krill records, they were an enemy that consumed everything in their path. The ancient humans were preparing the galaxy to fight against them. Commander Harper leaned back in his chair, trying to process what he was hearing. You're saying our ancestors were fighting a war against something that ate planets? That's exactly what I'm saying, Lisa replied. And according to Elder Kithron, the ancient humans eventually realized they couldn't win. So they did something that saved the galaxy, but doomed themselves to be forgotten. She paused, looking around the room at the shocked faces. They chose to forget. They used their technology to erase their own memories, scatter themselves across the galaxy, and start over. Earth wasn't humanity's birthplace. It was their hiding place. The room was completely silent. Lisa could see that some of the people present were struggling to accept what she was telling them. Elder Kithran said that the ancient humans believed the Void Hunters were attracted to advanced civilizations. Lisa continued. So they made themselves primitive again, hoping that if they forgot their own power, the enemy would ignore them. Dr. Williams raised her hand. If all of this is true, what happened to the Void Hunters? Lisa looked down at her notes, then back up at the room. According to Elder Kithron, they went dormant. They're still out there, in the dark spaces between galaxies, waiting for something to wake them up. Commander Harper felt a chill run down his spine. What would wake them up? Lisa met his eyes with a look that made everyone in the room uncomfortable. The return of an advanced human civilization. U.S. going back into space, making contact with other species, rebuilding the kind of technology that caught their attention the first time. The room was quiet for a long moment as everyone absorbed the implications of what Lisa was saying. Finally, Ambassador Fletcher spoke. Dr. Martinez, if what you're suggesting is true, then by exploring the galaxy and making contact with alien species, we may have just announced to our ancient enemy that humanity is back. The news of humanity's true origins spread across the galaxy faster than anyone had expected. Within days of Dr. Lisa Martinez's revelation, every alien species that had ever had contact with humans was requesting emergency meetings. The Galactic Confederation, which had been cautiously welcoming to humanity as a new member species, suddenly treated them as returning royalty. Captain Helen Davis stood on the bridge of the exploration ship Endeavour, watching the coordinates for Kepler 1649c appear on her navigation screen. This planet, according to Elder Kithron's ancient records, was the original homeworld of the first human civilization. After months of preparation and political negotiations, humanity was finally going home to a place they had never been. Dr. Martinez joined her at the viewing window, carrying a tablet filled with data from dozens of alien species who had suddenly become eager to share their oldest memories and records. I still can't believe how quickly everything changed, Lisa said. 3 months ago, we were just another new species trying to find our place in the galaxy. Now they're calling us the Air Civilization. Commander Ben Harper, who had been promoted to head of galactic security after the Krill revelation, approached them with a serious expression. The Vorthic delegation just arrived, he announced. Grothul says he has something important to show us when we reach the surface. The journey to Kepler 1649c had taken 2 weeks, but it felt like coming home to a place that existed only in dreams. The planet was beautiful, with blue oceans and green continents that reminded everyone of Earth. But as their ship entered orbit, they could see the dark scars across the surface where ancient cities had once stood. The landing party consisted of representatives from humanity and delegations from every major alien species. The Vorthic had sent their greatest hunters. The Zephrians had brought their wisest empresses. The Arachnari had dispatched their most skilled architects. Even the ancient Krill had sent a group led by Elder Kithron himself. They landed near what had once been the greatest city on the planet. Now it was ruins covered by millions of years of plant growth, but the basic structure was still visible. Massive buildings that could have housed millions of people stretched toward the horizon, their broken towers reaching toward the sky like the bones of some enormous creature. Grotho led the group toward the center of the ruined city, his massive form moving with surprising gentleness through the overgrown streets. "This place holds the deep memories," he explained through his translator. "The memories that my people have carried for 10 million years." As they walked deeper into the ruins, Lisa began to notice strange symbols carved into the remaining walls. They were different from the carvings they had seen on the alien worlds, more complex and sophisticated. When she ran her fingers over them, she felt a strange tingling sensation, as if the symbols were trying to communicate with her directly. "The writing speaks to you," Elder Kithron observed, his ancient voice carrying a note of satisfaction. "The blood remembers what the mind has forgotten." They reached the center of the city, where a massive pyramid rose from the jungle floor. Unlike the other ruins, this structure was perfectly preserved, its surface gleaming with an inner light that seemed to pulse with a steady rhythm. "This is the memory vault," Sethara explained, her serpentine form coiling around the base of the pyramid. "Our ancestors were told never to enter it, but to keep it safe until the Hunt Fathers returned." Ambassador Fletcher looked up at the towering structure. "How do we get inside?" Queen Vexthyla moved forward, her multiple eyes focused on the pyramid's surface. "The records say it will open only for those who carry the true sight," she said. "The eyes of the eternal hunt." Lisa stepped toward the pyramid, feeling drawn to it by something she couldn't explain. As she approached, the symbols on its surface began to glow brighter, and a section of the wall simply disappeared, revealing a doorway that led into darkness. Interior of the pyramid was filled with soft light that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The walls were covered with images that moved and changed as they watched, showing scenes from humanity's ancient past. Lisa saw humans working alongside the alien species they had encountered, teaching them, learning from them, building a civilization that spanned the galaxy. But then the images changed, showing something that made everyone in the group step backward. In fear, massive shapes moved through space, consuming entire star systems, leaving nothing but darkness in their wake. The Void Hunters were unlike anything they had imagined, not ships or creatures, but something that seemed to be made of hungry darkness itself. "They feed on energy," Elder Kithron explained, his voice filled with ancient sorrow. "The energy of life, of thought, of civilization itself. The more advanced a species becomes, the more attractive they are to the hunters." The images showed the ancient humans fighting a desperate war against the Void Hunters. Using technology, it seemed like magic. But no matter how hard they fought, the enemy kept coming, growing stronger with every world they consumed. Finally, the images showed the decision that had saved the galaxy but doomed humanity to forget their own greatness. The ancient humans gathered in this very chamber and used their most powerful technology to erase their own memories, scatter themselves across distant worlds, and hide their civilization so completely that even they would forget it had ever existed. "The sacrifice of the Hunt Fathers," Grotho said with deep respect. "They chose ignorance to save all life." But then the images changed again, showing something that filled the chamber with hope. The scattered humans on distant worlds, slowly rebuilding, slowly remembering. The moment when humans first looked up at the stars and dreamed of traveling to them. The first contact with alien species who recognized something familiar in their eyes. The return was always planned, Queen Vexthyla explained. The ancient humans knew that someday their descendants would rediscover space travel and make contact with the species they had taught. When that happened, the memories would be restored. Lisa felt something change inside her mind, as if doors that had been locked for millions of years were suddenly opening. Images flashed through her consciousness, memories that weren't her own, but belonged to her species. She saw the galaxy as it had been when humans first spread among the stars, young and full of life and possibility. "The knowledge is returning," Elder Kithrin observed. "But with it comes responsibility. The void hunters still sleep in the darkness between galaxies, but they are beginning to stir. Our sensors have detected movement in the deep void." "Commander." Harper felt his military training take over. "How long do we have?" "The ancient records suggest they will fully awaken within a few years of the air civilization's return," Zephra replied. "But this time, we will be ready." Lisa looked around at the faces of humans and aliens alike, all united in purpose for the first time in millions of years. "We're not the same species that ran and hid," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "We've learned things our ancestors never knew. We've built friendships with species they could only dream of working with. The apex predators of every world stand ready," Grothal announced with fierce pride. "The Hunt Fathers have returned, and we remember our purpose." Over the following months, the galaxy transformed as humanity reclaimed their role as the coordinators of the greatest alliance ever formed. Human engineers worked with Arachnari architects to build new types of starships. Vorthic pack tactics were combined with human strategy to create military formations that could fight in 3 dimensions. Zephrian patience was matched with human persistence to develop technologies that could track the void hunters across vast distances. Dr. Martinez, now the head of the Department of Galactic Heritage, stood in her new office on Earth and looked out at the stars. She could feel the memories of her ancestors flowing through her mind. Memories of a time when humans had been the galaxy's greatest hunters and protectors. But she also felt something else. The knowledge that out there in the dark, ancient enemies were stirring. The void hunters had slept for millions of years, but they were beginning to wake up, drawn by the energy of a galaxy that was once again alive with advanced civilization. The war that had driven humanity into hiding was about to begin again. But this time, they would not face it alone. Every apex predator in the galaxy stood ready to hunt alongside them, united by bonds that had been forged in the ancient past and renewed in the present. The humans had come home to a galaxy that remembered them, and together they would face whatever emerged from the cosmic dark with the same relentless determination that had once made them the greatest hunters among the stars.